Hello there and welcome back to another video here on Wristwatch Revival. My name is Marshall. Thank you so much for coming along. This time on the bench, we have my absolute favorite type of project to do on the channel. This watch belonged to a patron of mine named Alan, and it was his father's. Now, what happened is recently his mother passed away at age 98, and she left him some of his father's jewelry. His father had passed away about 37 years ago, so he's been gone for a while. Now, interestingly, there's a cool backstory to this family. Both of the parents grew up in Germany. The father saw the handwriting on the wall and left Germany in 1937 to come to the United States. And interestingly, he was sent back to Germany 5 years later as a U.S. soldier in World War II. Now, on the mother's side, she survived the Holocaust and ended up marrying his father right after the war ended. Now, his father was a professionally trained pastry baker and worked in that field for over 30 years. And he told me he used to come home and he smelled like all the delicious baked items that he had made that day, which I thought was really cool. Now, Alan took this watch to local jewelers where he lived, and they all turned him away. They told him that it wasn't worth the cost. And I got to say, that really upsets me because these things have so much more value than just their monetary value. Let's see how the watch is running. I wound it up and it does actually run, though, as you can see, not super well. The rate's actually not horrible, but you can see it's a bit of a snowfield there. And then the amplitude's pretty low. 127 degrees isn't really where you want to be. So we'll see if we can't improve on that. But yeah, they told him no, they turned him away. And I'll tell you, his father told him once, he never had an expensive wristwatch, but he said a good Swiss watch would last forever. And that's exactly what we have here. And today we're going to find out if that's true, because we are going to be restoring this watch top to bottom, with the end goal being to get it back on Alan's wrist. Now, some of the first things I notice here is, do you see, well, I have the crystal scratch, but do you see that gap between the dial and the inside of the case underneath? That's not right. I can actually hear it kind of rattling around in the case a little bit. So we're going to want to address that. That's something just to sort of note as an issue. But for now, let's take a look at the movement and see what we've got going on. Oh, okay. This doesn't look too bad, actually. You can see this is from the Desta watch company, which I don't think exists anymore, but it's a typical smaller brand from Switzerland during this time frame. There's a million brands like this. See if we can take off the winding crown here so we can actually get the movement and the dial and the hands and everything out of the case. One thing that stands out here is it's very, very dirty. You can tell that this watch was worn. It was worn while Alan's father was working, for sure. You can just tell. Oh, look at this. The dial is actually just loose in the case. So, or on the movement. That might have been why that gap existed. That is not a good sign, though. That should be securely mounted to the movement so that it can't bump up against the hands. That can cause all types of annoying stuff to happen. Now, it could also just be that this watch hasn't been serviced in a long time, and we just need to make sure that it's secured all the way down. We'll do that when we put the watch back together. In the meantime, I can take the dial apart and see if the dial feet are intact. Yeah, they are. So that's a good news, because that's the other way that the dial could be loose on the movement, is if the dial feet had broken off or didn't exist or something. But that's not the case here. So that's good news. And now we can put both the dial and the hands into special little boxes. You know, there's quite a bit of time from when you from when I disassemble a watch to researching any parts that I need, and then getting back to actually putting it back together. So I like to use these little boxes just to protect those parts. This is a cannon pinion removal tool. It's a specialized tool just for removing cannon pinions. If you don't have one, you can use a couple of different tools. You can use what's called a Presto tool, which is another specialized tool for this purpose, or you can even just use this dirty pair of tweezers. It's a little riskier to use the tweezers and it takes a little longer, so I like that tool that I have, but I like I like buying all types of tools like that. Any of them that I can have, I'm in. I'm one of those people. Okay, so Let's start the disassembly process here, and we'll start by removing the balance itself. As you can see, this is a fairly modern movement, even though this watch came out likely in the 60s, is what I would assume. Perhaps the late 50s, but more likely would be the early 60s for a piece like this. And again, you know, these type of watch brands, there's a million of them. They basically, the way the Swiss watch industry worked at the time, and somewhat true to this day, is that you could start a new watch company, and in order to put Swiss made on it, you had to use basically exclusively Swiss made parts, but you didn't have to make them yourself in Switzerland. You could go to the companies that produce screws or movements or dials or cases or crystals or hands or anything you want, and you could order those. And then, you know, when you got the dial made, you'd have your own company name put on the dial, and you would use off the shelf parts or even sometimes custom parts from different companies. It was how the Swiss watch industry became what it became. I mean, it hasn't always been the most important watch industry. There was a long time when it was in England. There was even a time, as specifically for pocket watches, where US pocket watches were considered, you know, the highest grade ones. But it's been the Swiss watch industry that's been the number one for a while now. Okay, so balance out, as well as the train wheel bridge and a couple of the train wheels. Now we can start taking apart the top half of the barrel bridge. So that's going to be the ratchet wheel, as well as the crown wheel. And so far, everything's coming apart. I can see a decent amount of dirt in this movement. It is in dire need of a service, but everything structurally looks pretty good to me so far. I'm happy about that. The fact that the watch was running is also an indicator of that, right? If there's something catastrophic, it won't be running usually. Okay, so let's see how the barrel bridge looks underneath, as well as the barrel itself. As you can see, there's a bridge that goes across the middle of this movement too, and that goes over the center wheel. There's the barrel bridge, a little sticky coming off. And part of the keyless works kind of worked its way loose as well, so I might as well just take that out now. And this is the setting lever screw. Now, if I undo this all the way, it should come loose, and then I should be able to just take it out. And now I can continue by taking apart this intermediate bridge. Again, this one goes over the center wheel, and that's because this has a center seconds hand. It goes right in the middle, and it actually goes right in the barrel of that center wheel. A little stubborn. Again, I'm noticing this a little bit more and more as we get into the movement, that some of the parts are a little bit stubborn, and this is very typical for a watch that just could use a service. Okay, center wheel comes out fine though, and we've got the escape wheel here as well. And now I can take out the mainspring barrel too. So everything's coming apart just fine. One more part on this side of the movement, and that would be the pallet fork bridge with pallet fork underneath it. These usually have a different shaped screw on the top, and this one's no exception. It's flatter, and that way the pallet fork can, or excuse me, the balance wheel, which sits above it, can spin, oscillate back and forth. And you can see once again, see how it's stuck in the pivot? It's not jammed, but it doesn't come free. And that's because there was oil or some debris in there that has dried up and made it kind of a gummy mess. So that is the other part, by the way, the keyless works that fell out. Now we can flip the movement over and finish the disassembly. This movement, by the way, is exactly what I had talked about before. It's a commodity movement. It's a off-the-shelf movement, if you will, but it is a totally serviceable, both in the phrase that you're thinking of, but also in the sense that I can service this over and over and over movement. It's really good. These things are totally fine, and frankly, I think Alan's father was correct. This is a good Swiss movement, and if taken care of, it will last forever. You just have to have it serviced depending on how much you're wearing it and using it, but they recommend 5 to 7 years. I would say you could probably go 7 to 9 years on a movement like this and be fine. Ooh, look at that gunk. There was some type of grease or something. It looks like it dried up on the inside of the barrel here. So we'll get that cleaned out. You don't really need much in the way of lubrication on the inside of the barrel. And now we can remove the mainspring from the barrel, and it looks like it's in good shape. That is definitely not one of the old style mainsprings. When this watch was made, that would be called an unbreakable mainspring. They don't call them that anymore. Probably just because it's not true. Like they probably got told you can't call it that. Compared to the prior ones, it kind of was true, but unbreakable means unbreakable. And there's the spring. It looks actually like it's in really good shape. This watch has been sitting for a very long time, of course. Taking a look around the edges here, you can see the accumulation of dirt as well as a nice big crack on the side of the crystal there, and a bunch of scratches on it. Again, this is the signs. I can just pop the crystal out of a watch that was worn. This is what happens when you wear watches. It's totally fine. It's also why these things do need to be replaced from time to time. I can use a piece of pegwood just to, clean off the inside of where the bezel goes. Now I'm going to be cleaning this case in the ultrasonic cleaner. So this isn't the only cleaning that I'm going to be doing to it, but this can help get off, as you can see, some of the bigger chunks of dirt and debris that have accumulated between the lugs or under the lugs or anywhere. And you can see there's some dirt on my bench there as a result. Pretty dirty. But again, this is very typical for watches that just need a good service. I'm going to take off the gasket that goes around the case back here. This is an older style gasket. It was a harder plastic. Now we tend to use rubber, and so I'll be replacing it with a modern gasket there as well. And with that, we can put everything into these little mesh baskets. That of course, means that we're going to be cleaning them. It's going to go into a 3-step cleaning process and in the watch cleaning machine. And then sometimes you even have to do a little bit more manual cleaning or some ultrasonic cleaning to finish it up. But the first step, and usually the last, the watch cleaning machine does a very good job, is to put everything into this mesh basket and then put it into the watch cleaning machine. Now, one thing that does happen, though, is you do need to change out the chemicals every once in a while on these. So this is the watch cleaning solution. This is the extra fine one from L&R, which, by the way, is the same company that made this. I spilled a little bit there, but brand new fresh cleaning fluid in here as well. It depends on how often you're cleaning movements. For me, I'm not doing volume here, right? Like I'm not trying to run 3 or 4 watches through the watch cleaning machine every day or anything. So I can change it pretty infrequently, but still I like to keep it clean so that the watches get the best that they can. Now, as this watch is being cleaned, I did want to mention that I have a Patreon for this channel. In fact, that's where I met Alan. And this is the place where you can go to support your favorite content creators. And if I happen to be one of them, great. If you have others, I'm totally happy to send them over for them too, because I just think it's an awesome deal over at Patreon. Basically, it's a way for people to make their content independently and you can support them directly. In my case, you get a thank you card and a Wristwatch Revival sticker in the mail, no matter what level you're at. And you also get access to the videos, depending on what level you're at, a little sooner than when they come out, rough cuts of the videos, that type of stuff. And I just wanted to say thank you so much to everybody who supports me on Patreon. It really does mean the world to me, and it allows me to keep making the videos. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I really, really appreciate it. And as you can see, the watch goes through 4 total steps, but 3 cleaning steps and then a drying step. This first one is the most important. That's the watch cleaning machine fluid. The next 2, though, are rinses. And so that will make sure that there's nothing left as far as debris or dried on oil or anything like that goes through the process. And, it works really, really well. This agitation process and these chemicals, they do a great job of cleaning these watches. And for those of you wondering about what I use in my ultrasonic cleaner, I'm going to show you that too. As you can see, it's empty right now. And so the first thing I'll do is add some distilled water to it. And there's a certain line on the side. And then I've tried a bunch of these different ultrasonic cleaning solutions and they're all fine. Here's a few of the ones that I tried myself and they're all pretty much the same. This is the one that I settled on. This was a tip from Alex over at Watch Repair Tutorials here on YouTube. And I got the product that he recommended. He really knows his stuff as a longtime watchmaker. So I trust his opinion and this stuff's good. It's called Liquinox and it seems to work really well. It's highly concentrated. So for somebody like me, it's going to last forever. And then, I'm just going to put the parts of the case and the bracelet into the ultrasonic cleaner and let it run its full cycle. It heats up the liquid inside and also does the ultrasonic thing. And wow. So that was clean, fresh water. And as you can see, not so much anymore. There was just a lot of dirt built up on this case and bracelet and stuff. Also, these particular types of bracelets are very much known for grabbing a whole bunch of dirt. So we'll probably have to run it through a few times, but take a look at this. Here's all the parts and everything out of all of the cleaning cycles that we have, and it looks nice. Look at that. Everything cleaned up very nicely on this. It just took a little bit of extra work in the ultrasonic and in the watch cleaning machine to get it done. And with that, we can now start the reassembly. Now, the first thing that you'll notice is we're going to need to put in the mainspring. And for that, I have a special tool called mainspring winders. And their whole entire job on this planet is to do exactly that. They're to safely wind the mainspring back into the barrel. And the way it works is you wind it into kind of a fake barrel here, like a pseudo barrel that's backwards. And then you do this. Boom, just like that. And that'll put the entire thing back into place. And now we can go ahead and install the barrel arbor as well. And this, of course, is where we start using some amount of oil lubrication. It's either a grease or an oil, depending on what we have it for. And in big, broad strokes, there's 3 different types that I use. There's more than that for specialty stuff. But, there's kind of like a thicker grease, and then there's like a medium oil and then a light oil. It would be one way to put it. And you do need all of them, and you actually need more than that too to service a watch, but that's a good start. So with the barrel all put back together, we can put it into place, and now we can start. I always try to do this right away. This is the setting lever screw, and it's so easy to forget about it because it goes into a post here. The thing it screws into is actually on the other side of the movement. So you just simply set it in its post. But if you forget, you can put plates in place and have to undo all of it. So it's a good tip to remember to do that straight away so that you don't forget. Now I can use some of that medium oil. You can see it's got kind of a red color to it for the center wheel, which goes in first here, because remember it has that extra bridge that goes over it to hold it steady and to make sure that everything works with that center seconds hand. And how does it go on again? Something like this. There we go, like that. I always have to, you fuss around with a little bit, until it gets right. And then we can take some of the screws to make sure that this bridge is secured in and of itself. Overall, this movement came out really nice. It cleaned up beautifully. Look how nice it looks now. Now I'm going to use some of my light viscosity oil here for the center seconds, which is on the other end of this wheel. This wheel spins at the appropriate rate for a seconds hand. That is, it makes one rotation every minute. And it actually holds the hand on the end of it. Okay, now we can put the barrel bridge into place. And I'll often use a pointer stick, a piece of pegwood, something to kind of hold the bridge steady as I'm getting ready to pin it down with the screwdriver here. This is just a safety thing. If it shifts while you're screwing down a screw, it can get kind of ugly. This is awkward. Okay. Yeah, so I actually should have just put this part on first. And so I think I'm just going to undo what I have already done. It only should take a second to put those back on, but I don't want to be taking risk of damaging those parts while I'm trying to screw this down. So I'm just going to go ahead and put on both the ratchet wheel and the crown wheel now with those wheels out of the way. As is often the case for me, I'm working on different movements all the time, so I will have to go back sometimes and undo a little something. When you work on the same movement over and over again, those little gotchas kind of go away and you get your routine down, and you can get really, really good at the tricky parts and the little, like I said, the little gotchas that each movement has. But for me, one of the things I really love about this hobby is that I get to work on all different types of things. I get to see different eras. I get to see different technologies. I get to see different approaches from different companies and even cultures. put in. And for me, that's a cool thing, but it is a challenge. So, you know, I'll have to go back a little bit here and there, but no big deal. I can just put these wheels back in now that I've got the other two in place. You can kind of feel when it engages with the bottom pivot, and that's the goal there. This one does not engage with a bottom pivot, however. As I mentioned, the bottom of this pivot is actually what you put the seconds hand on. But both of the other two wheels there do have bottom pivots, and before I put on the train wheel bridge, they will need to be engaged in there. So just a little bit of back and forth will do the job. And now I can put the train wheel bridge on carefully. And this time I'm going to use the pointer stick, but very gentle pressure down. And this is just to give it a chance to fall into place in case that's what it wants to do. But unfortunately, it looks like, yeah, the escape wheel seems to have fallen out of its pivot, maybe even one of the others. But do you see how it's all crooked there? That needs to be in the pivots on the bottom and the top. Okay, let's try it again. I'll gently set this train wheel bridge on top. This is where a lot of times those wheels can get knocked around, is when you're initially setting the bridge down. And again, just gentle, patient motion until each of the pivots engages in its pivot hole. You don't want to force anything. This sometimes can be a process, and in this case, it's giving me a little bit of pushback, but that's okay. Oh, that looked like something. Now let's take a look. So I can take a look now on the microscope, and I can see pivot hole, aha. So it is once again the escape. There is no pivot in that hole there. So what I'm going to do is, again, gently push down and then use my tweezers to reach underneath to find where that pivot hole is and align it. Pivot is, and align it with that hole. Do you see? Oh, there it is over on the left. And there, if I push down, boom, you see how it went into the pivot hole there? And now that means that at least that one, and good, it looks like the others too, are aligned. And I finally have this back on. Sometimes it takes a little while. And this is one of those ones, and you can see the pivot holes in there. The pivots in their pivot holes there as well. And that's what we want to see. And that lets you know that everything's good to go. And then now carefully, once again, keep a little bit of pressure on the top of that bridge until I can get a few of these screws tacked down. And then once I do, I'll retest it just to make sure that everything's running smoothly and that there's no hangups or anything like that. And then I am good to go. Now we can turn the movement over and start working on the other side. And that is going to be the keyless works to start things off. And this is a classic Swiss keyless works. This is exactly how basically all of them are made, with few exceptions. And this is also one of the parts of the watch that has the most friction applied. These are metal parts that are actually meant to be metal on metal and turn against each other. And hence the blue grease comes out for these ones. This is called the clutch, the sliding clutch, and then the part I already did was the clutch wheel, and they work kind of like a clutch in a car. It is two faces rubbing, and that creates, in this case, kind of a clicking because they have a edged face on them, and that lets you turn one direction and not the other. Now I can put on this intermediate wheel. All this does is take the turning action of the crown. It goes down through the sliding clutch, and then it turns that wheel, which turns another wheel, which then turns the wheels that your hands are actually attached to. And this, once again, is the cannon pinion, and the only real way to put it back on is like that. Just a sturdy pair of tweezers and click it into place. It's held on by friction. If that's too loose, the watch hands won't display correctly, and if it's too tight, you can't set them. Usually it's good to go because it worked before, but occasionally you'll have to tighten or loosen that grip. But thankfully, this one, it looks like we don't have to. Now I can put on the setting lever, and I do have to pick up the entire movement and hold the setting lever in place with my finger so that I can screw in the setting lever screw from the other side. It's a little bit of a tricky operation, but you do get used to it over time. Okay, now we can put on the crown and stem. And that'll just kind of hold everything in place and make sure that it's lined up properly. We don't need to use it quite yet. There we go. And a little bit of grease on the post here where there's going to be the yoke and the yoke spring. Again, these are parts that are held under tension, and there's quite a bit of friction there. So you really don't want to forget to lubricate those posts, because yeah, it goes back and forth every single time you set your watch. If you pull out the crown, it jams it one direction, then boom, back the other way. And again, it's under a decent amount of tension. This is the yoke spring. Really careful with this one. These bad boys love to go flying across the room. And if you ever take up this hobby, you will find at some point that you're down on all fours with a magnifying glass and a magnet and a flashlight trying to find a part that you dropped. It is just kind of part of the experience ultimately. And I do find that the more experience you have doing the hobby, the less that happens. You start to learn the parts that are more apt to fly away, and so it doesn't become like a major issue, but it's going to happen. It is part of the deal. Okay, now we can put on the setting lever spring, which is attached to this kind of cover that goes over the intermediate wheel, it goes over the minute wheel, and then it has the spring kind of jutting out as well. And multifunction part. It's an elegantly designed piece, no doubt about it. As I mentioned, these are absolutely my favorite type of projects to take on, because while this isn't a particularly expensive wristwatch, this one has incalculable sentimental value to the owner. You know, this is something that, his father wore for 30 years. He associates it with them. These are some of the connections that you can have even after a loved one has been gone for, 37 years. In this case, it's a way that you can still connect to that person. And of course, that has a lot more meaning than any dollar amount that you can get. And I love that. These are my favorite type of projects. Really frustrating, too, that the jewelers in the area wouldn't even take the thing on at all. Just don't understand that. Okay, now I can grab some One Dip, which is a solvent that you can use to clean individual parts, particularly parts with the escapement. And what I'm going to use here is an air blower. It actually has a metal tip so that it doesn't kind of get melted, because this is some pretty hardcore solvent that we use here. And I'm just using it to agitate it around the parts so that, the parts can get properly cleaned. In this case, it's the entire balance. They call it like the balance complete. And it has the balance bridge, the balance wheel, and the balance spring all there, as well as the pallet fork. The pallet fork has shellac on it that holds the pallet fork jewels in place. And there is a small risk that putting it in the watch cleaning machine can loosen the shellac a little bit. So it can be sometimes better to just put them in a solvent for just a very short period of time and then dry them off. It's a little safer. And that's what I'm doing here. I just wanted to show you, a little bit more of the depth of some of the restoration work that I do, because this one is a relatively straightforward deal as far as like how complicated the movement is. It's time only. I've worked on movements like this before, at least something similar. And so I thought I would take a little more time to show you some of the detail work that we do, or that I do at least on these. Also wanted to mention that if you are interested in getting into a hobby like this, if you have a watch, from a loved one that you'd love to try to restore someday, and you want to start to walk down the road, you don't want to, start your journey on important family heirlooms. But if you do want to start off, I started a website with a friend of mine named Alex. We're both watch guys and we both love this stuff. And it's called sutcliffehansen.com. There's a link down below. And on there, we have toolkits that I actually curated every single tool that gets used in there for beginners, including a kit that comes with a watch movement that you can practice on, as well as more intermediate and high level complete kits and stuff for people that are more into it. Our goal is to try to open up the world to this hobby of watchmaking. It's been so rewarding for me, and a really cool journey, and I think you might like it too. So yeah, sutcliffehansen.com is where you can find it. We also have some watch straps, some watches for sale, and we have auctions that will run for the watches that I've repaired on the channel that belong to me. Okay, So now we're just about ready to see if this thing wants to run. This is the exciting part of every one of these. Even if it was running before, we want to make sure that it's going to be going really nice here. So first we'll start by putting in the pallet fork bridge, and now we put in the balance itself and see if this thing will kick up. So that's our first step. And you have to be so you have to be very careful, but then it jumped to life anyway. So fantastic. It is now officially running. So that's a very good start. Now we are, of course, nowhere near finished with getting this thing to where it's going to be. This watch needs to be lubricated, and I'm going to show you how I do that. And one of the other questions that I get a lot is, what's the difference between whether the watch has been lubricated or not? So let's put it on the time grapher before doing the oiling and see how it comes out. So as you can see, we've got a big improvement over before. It's at, looks like 221 degrees of amplitude, and it's 34 seconds fast right now. So now I'm going to do my normal oiling. I'll show you that, and then we'll put it back on the time grapher and regulate it and see what kind of improvement we can get. But interestingly, it's already significantly better than when it came in, mainly because the dried on oil actually slows things down. It goes from being something that is really good for your watch to being for something that's actually, if it weren't there, it would be better than having it just be gone. So just the right amount of oil, hopefully, on the jewels. And now we can take off the shock setting as well. And this will allow us to get to the upper balance jewel here. There's, of course, the same thing on the bottom as well. You can see the balance pivot just bouncing around there. And taking off this jewel setting will reveal that there's actually two parts to it. There's a upper cap jewel and a lower hole jewel. And this one doesn't really want to come apart. Weird. I've never actually had this happen. It could just be because there's dried on oil that's sort of glued it together, but let's see if I can use some Rodico. Oh, there it goes. Yeah, wow. I have never had to work that hard to get those two pieces apart, but yeah, this one was very stubborn. But now that they are apart, I can clean them properly. Now take a look at what happens when they're not cleaned. Do you see that dried on oil, not only just in the middle, but around the edge? That's what we need to clean off. We want that surface to be perfectly flat and clean. So I'm going to use some pegwood that I've whittled to a kind of a flat plane to go around and manually clean it. Then I'll put it in the one dip, that same solution that I was using before, the solvent, and then we'll know that it's good and clean and ready to have more oil put onto it, fresh oil put onto it. So there it is now out of the one dip, and take a look. You see how much cleaner that is now? That's what we need. And that is what makes one of the things that makes the watch run even better than before. So now a droplet of oil directly in the middle, as you can see of that. And you don't want to use too much, but you don't want to use too little. It's kind of a feel thing. And then I can simply put this part back on, and then the oil will actually kind of suction cup that cap jewel in place. And then I can replace it back in the watch movement. Looking good. And nice shot by me there. All those years of basketball finally paying off. And now I can replace the shock setting as well. That's the shock spring on the top. That one's called an Inca Block. There's numerous companies that make it, but Inca Block is one of the companies. And now let's put it back on the time grapher and see how it's doing. Now, the first thing you'll notice is the amplitude significantly higher. Now it's up in the 270s, so we got a good gain there. But as you can see, the rate and even the beat error to a point are off. So I'm going to show you how I actually regulate these, because sometimes I don't have enough time to show every little step. But I'm going to show you here. And if you can see here, this end is the regulation arm right here. This, if I move this from side to side, it will either speed up or slow down the rate of the watch. And you can see right where that, it's called a trace, right where it is, it went up when I turned it over, and we got it down to about -4 seconds. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you each of the little tiny adjustments that I make, and you and I are just going to go through the whole entire process together here. I'm not going to cut anything out until we get the watch to a place where we're happy. So if I move it back over here, that'll speed it up. And as you can see, it's at +11. And now that's actually gotten pretty close, -3 seconds a day. Not too bad. I mean, already, that would be perfectly acceptable for a watch of this age, but, I think we can do a little better. Also, you have to let it sit for a minute and kind of figure out what its new rate is. And you can see it's at -5. And I bumped it way too much on that. And if you look at the trace on the right, you can see that it's basically bottomed out. So I already know, okay, well, that was too much. And I'm going to try to bring this back just a little tiny bit, but it's the tiniest adjustments, really super small adjustments that make the difference. And as you can see, the rate, again, you can look at those two dots as they go, and you want them to be really close together and you want them to be going flat. And as it stands, it's at -36, but I made an adjustment and boom, that bumped it up. Now it's at least +6 seconds a day. And now it looks like it's maybe even creeping downward. Still says +6, but I wouldn't be surprised to see it. Yeah, there we go, -10 now. So again, I need to go back over to the plus just a little tiny bit. And it's really kind of a skill that you learn to do this like the absolute minimum. Now, I'm sped it up here just because I'm letting it equalize itself out, not making any adjustments in between. And look at that, +1 seconds a day within 0.2, and the amplitude's up to 275. So that is fantastic. That basically proves Alan Father's his assertion that a good Swiss watch like this one would run forever. And I'm even going to let it speed up just a little bit here so that you can see how well it's held up. 0 seconds, 1 second, really, really great for a watch like this. So I'm super happy with that. And if you ever want to try regulating a watch, that's how you do it. Now, I took a look, by the way, at the crown, and there's a bunch of dirt built up. Now, this is consistent with the watch, though this did go through the cleaning cycle as well. But I'm looking at it and I see just a ton of dirt, but also it looks like a rubber gasket or stopper or something underneath. So this is actually just sort of a top layer of buildup that I need to remove. But watch this. If I take out this centerpiece, boom, it takes out that rubber ring, which is actually, still very much intact. And then it reveals, though, that there is a bunch of dirt buildup underneath. So I'm going to use this little scraper to kind of break that loose. And then I'll throw it into the ultrasonic cleaner just to get any of this extra dirt out. This is, just the detail work that helps the watch stay clean and also stay as water resistant as possible. I'd like Alan to be able to wear this whenever he'd like, I'm not going to go swimming in it, but check it out. That's what it looks like after the ultrasonic and after the manual cleaning to get it out of there. Fantastic. Now, the next step I'm going to do as kind of a precaution is I'm going to use some silicone grease. So this is the type of grease that's used on these gaskets and also on these interfaces where they can be exposed to water, and it really helps seal things up. And as you can see, that gasket held up actually quite well, even with all the dirt and the scraping and all that kind of stuff too. And so now I can put another thin layer of grease on top of that as well. And now the crown is better. Again, it's all about the details when it comes to this stuff. Now, we can do the final assembly of the watch. We've got a really well-running movement, and we just need to get the last parts of the movement together and then get the case, the crystal, the dial, and everything all handled, and we'll be good to go. So first thing is, if you remember, the dial was loose. It was not fully attached to the movement when I first got it. And so I want to make sure that I can re-secure the dial. And that is just by screwing in the screws on the side where the dial feet go, and it worked fine. They had just worked their way loose, but the dial is very much intact. I'm going to use a little bit of Rodico to remove any residual dirt. There was dirt inside the case, so a quick cleaning on the indices and on the dial with Rodico, but that's it. You really can't do much else to move to dials like this. You will remove some of the clear coat layers and you will ruin the dial. So that's it. That's all I can do to it, and I have to be happy with that. Next up are the hands, and these are pretty straightforward on a watch like this. These are called Dauphine hands. They're the ones that kind of have that angular shape to them. They were very, very popular for the time frame. And once again, a little bit of Rodico just to remove any surface debris or anything and get them looking slightly better. This isn't like restoring the hands, but these ones don't need it. They're in fine shape. But it's just making sure that since this watch did have some dirt on the inside of the case, that there's nothing left on the hands there. And then just a quick check to make sure that the hour hand is able to be set. And you can set it to whatever hour you want to put on the minute hand. For watches with a date, that's not true, but this is not one of those. This is what they call a time-only watch. It just shows hours, minutes, and in this case, seconds as well. So you can put it to whatever hour you want as long as it's lined up properly. I use this little hand press to put on the hands, but there's a tool, and I'll use it sometimes too, that's a hand tool, like human hand tool to put on the watch hands. And then there's also just tweezers. It's not really the preferred method, but you can do it. All right. Once again, Rodico details, right? Just get a little bit of clean on that. And then I'll put on the last hand, which is the seconds hand. And this goes on the end post for that long wheel pivot that I showed you earlier. And once I get it lined up, it'll go on, that is. And I'll just kind of use the edge of the hand press tool here to make sure that that's in place. And just, again, little touches here. And a very light touch with this Rodico. You don't want to go bending the hand up or anything like that. Okay. And that, of course, leaves us with the crystal, which was basically destroyed. For a watch like this or a project like this, I'll send Alan the old crystal back. It's original. It was on there when his father was wearing it. So I'll send it back to him just to have. But this is very much needs a new crystal. Not only was the other one heavily worn, it was also cracked, and that means that water can get in, and that's not going to do if this watch is going to be worn at all. And so I'm going to be putting a new crystal on, and I think it's going to go great. The dial's really vibrant on a watch like this. It's that classic kind of silver sunburst look, and I think a brand new crystal is really going to bring that out as well. And take a look at that. Case is all cleaned up, no more dirt on it, and a brand new crystal has been installed as well. These are made out of acrylic. They have been forever. The original one for the watch would have been made out of the same thing, and it's a fantastic material. Really, really nice stuff. It gives a certain kind of vibe that sapphire glass can't. Now, this is an interesting part here too. So this ring is called a movement ring. It goes around the outside edge of the movement and keeps it from moving around in the case, because almost no movements are actually as big as the entire watch case. And as you can see, there's a ring of space around the outside. I'm going to come back to that though, because we also need to put on this gasket around the outside part of the watch case. And again, with a little bit of silicone grease on there as well, this will give it a new life of getting as close to waterproof as this watch can be, let's say. These are not made to be worn in the ocean or the swimming pool, but you can definitely wash your hands or get it stuck in some rain in it and it won't be an issue. Now I'm going to put on the watch case back here as well. As you can see, it says waterproof. Another term that they are not allowed to use anymore, unbreakable, waterproof. They were going pretty hard at it in the 60s. But take a look at what I see here. Do you see that edge between where the dial meets the case? It's still there, and I can still hear the dial kind of flapping around. And here's why. So do you see that tab there? There's 3 of those tabs. There's one there and one there. That's what pushes the whole dial and movement structure down. And these are actually pushed up against the top back part of the case back itself. So I think if I just bend these tabs up, I think they just got bent down a little too much. That'll give me that secure up against the edge feeling that I want to have. Yeah, see, it doesn't, I can just tell by shaking it that it doesn't shake anymore and that there's no gap there. And take a look. It is now all the way up against the inside of the case. So that did solve that problem, which is awesome. So now we can just simply put on the original bracelet. As you can see, I cleaned it. I actually had to put it through 3 or 4 more cycles on the ultrasonic to get it clean, because these bracelets are absolutely notorious for grabbing dirt and that kind of stuff. I'm going to replace the spring bars here as well. These are brand new ones just to make sure that the watch is safe. And then when I send this watch back to Alan, he can choose. This was the type of band that his father loved. He told me that specifically, that he just loved these stretchy bands. But this is the type of watch, they call it a strap monster in the watch collecting world. It's the type of watch that you could put almost any strap on and it would look cool, right? A high quality leather strap would look fantastic on this, even like a textile one or something like that. And look at the end result. Is this watch not awesome? Like, this is the reason to do this, is that this type of watch that is from a brand that doesn't even exist anymore, from the 60s, and anybody else, including the jewelers that he took it to, would think it wasn't worth anything, but it is. These are important family heirlooms, and I'm going to send this one back to Alan, and hopefully when he wears it, he can remember his father. Thank you so much for coming along with me for this journey. I absolutely love doing these videos for you, and I really appreciate you taking the time to hang out with me. If you want to find me on Instagram, I'm wristwatch_revival over there. You can come say hi, and I'll post some in-between project updates and stuff. And with that, we'll see you next time.